Hey everyone, welcome to a brand new interview series called Keys from Keynotes, where I aim to interview some of the greatest keynote speakers in the world and learn things about what makes them great from the stage. Now, those of you who have been following my YouTube channel may be familiar with me. My name is Wade Patterson, and I'm passionate about impactful communication and public speaking. It's my goal to help make you a more confident communicator. And if you're brand new to the podcast, the audio side of this is an interview series I hope to keep going over the years and interview various people from the field who are professional speakers to hear their advice. You've heard from YouTube enough about my perspective. Now it's time to tap into the perspective of those who are professionals in what they do. So if you're listening to the podcast form of this, feel free to look me up on YouTube. My channel is Wade Patterson, and it's all about impactful communication. And if you're watching on YouTube, please know that there's also this audio version, the podcast version of these interviews, so you can listen to them on the go on all of your favorite podcast apps. And in this, the first episode, the first conversation, we're starting off strong, an interview with Giselle Ugarte, and she talks all about her experience, her story of starting her public speaking career during the pandemic, behind a kitchen table with no agent, and how she built up her career through effective use of video and teaching companies and individuals and employees and even real estate agents how they can leverage social media and video content in order to build their brand in a very human way and also leverage these platforms. This was a great conversation. Giselle got super vulnerable. She talked about the nerves she gets before she speaks. I mean, we know public speaking is a major fear for many people, but is it a major fear for professional public speakers? It clearly is, as Giselle explained, but she talks about how she harnesses that energy and then how she customizes all of her speeches to be fit for the audience she's presenting to. So some speakers have one deck that they use, one slideshow, and they deliver the same presentation to every different audience. Giselle never uses the same speech twice. She always customizes it, and she talks about why that's important. So I hope you really enjoy this brand new series, Episode 1, featuring Giselle. Well, hey there, and welcome to a brand new interview series, which I'm calling Keys from Keynotes, with the idea that I'm going to talk to some of the world's greatest public speakers and get their insights of how they are confident from the stage. And hopefully it gives you a lot of great ideas as well. And we're starting off with a great one. Today, I am joined, episode number 1, by Giselle Ugarte. And Giselle built her professional speaking career behind a kitchen table during lockdown without an agent. Today, Giselle is one of the most sought-after speakers on the circuit, tackling topics such as personal branding, healthy social media habits, and the future of leadership, while ensuring each presentation is unique and custom-built for each individual audience. Giselle, welcome to Keys from Keynotes.
Thank you so much for including me, for having me. Even hearing that intro, I was like, yeah, like this is what I worked so hard for. And whoa, it's all happening and the hard work is paying off. So thank you. Thank you so much.
So let's go back to that. In lockdown, this is where you started your speaking career. Can you break that into more detail? What did that look like? Why did you want to start a career in speaking? And how did you get started?
Well, there's a few different questions in there. So how did I get started? My first ever paid speaking gig, I opened up for Gary Vaynerchuk, which sounds pretty cool if you know who Gary Vaynerchuk is, but I want to give you like the candid, raw, real version, which was I got paid about $500 to do it. And in comparison, I mean, I think for that one, he got paid at least 100,000. He's charging more than that now. So I was a steal. And it was the kind of thing where it was a local event in Rochester, in Minnesota, where I'm from. And the coordinators reached out to simply invite me to the event. And I had in my mind, in my heart, in my secret journal, I want to work with Gary Vaynerchuk and I want to be a professional speaker. And I wrote these dreams over and over. And all of a sudden on the phone call where they were like, yeah, do you want to come to this dinner beforehand for just influential locals? I was like, yeah, but do you have an opener? And they're like, an opener. I was like, yeah, do you have someone to like open it up? Do you need someone who can MC the event or deliver the opening keynote or, just like hype up the crowd beforehand? And they were like, no. And I'm like, I'll do it. I'll do it if you want. And they're like, you would do that? And I was like, yeah, of course, I would love to. And they're like, that would be amazing. Like as if I was doing them a favor. And they were like, so like, how much do you charge? And I was like, I didn't think I was going to get to a yes, like I really didn't. I knew that I wanted to do it, but I didn't think that far ahead. So I just blurted out $500 and they agreed instantly. Again, now in retrospect, with all of the other money that they probably put at least $500,000 into this event. So 500 again, steal. And that was my first ever event. And what I also think is worth mentioning to your audience is how, again, I'd never done this before. And what was so funny is here's Gary Vaynerchuk, who's known for content and authenticity. And if you know him, you know that like he's as casual as it comes. Like wears a beanie to the office, wears a t-shirt on stage, is off the cuff and speaks his mind. And for some reason, all of a sudden, I completely got stiff and I think lost my identity where I thought of like, what do I need to do to like do speaking? Like, what does a speaker do? Like, what is a speaker supposed to do? And what is like a business woman speaker in the tech space? What does she look like? Even though they hired me because they know me and they know my personality. And I went to this other place of thinking that I needed to like do and supposed to all this. I went to the mall and I got a Banana Republic jumpsuit. And there's nothing wrong with Banana Republic other than I had never shopped there before. And I just thought that a serious businesswoman speaker was supposed to wear a pantsuit and a high neck and all black. And she's supposed to wear heels, like baby heels. And if you don't know who I am, like I love shoes, I love sneakers, I love a sexy stiletto. So to wear like a baby 2-inch plain Jane heel, that's again, just so not like me, but this is what I thought was like a businesswoman pump. And then I went to the Apple store and I bought an Apple Watch because I thought that that's what smart techie business people are supposed to wear. Granted, what's funny is that at the time I actually had like a beautiful Rolex watch that I wore all the time. And I didn't want people to think that I was too uppity or, who bought it for me. So I went and got a gray plain Apple Watch. Again, there's nothing wrong with Apple Watches other than I don't wear Apple Watches. Like these are not things that I do. And I was trying to do speaker versus be speaker. And I was trying to button up in such a way that I felt like I sort of lost myself. And then even when I got on stage, I felt like I was trying to emulate Gary versus be me. Anybody who was watching probably thought that I did like a pretty good job, especially considering that it was my first time. But I knew looking back, like, that's not you. Like, that's just not it. But kudos to you, to anyone who is putting themselves out there on stage or doing workshops or creating content, because sometimes you have to do that before you learn who you've been all along and who you need to be. Like, at least I put myself out there to then figure it out. At least I did the cringe keynote and like the Banana Republic jumpsuit and had that opportunity and to be with Gary. And so in that moment, a fire was lit, but I didn't totally know how to go about doing that. And I thought, am I supposed to leave my job and pursue this fully? And I didn't. Instead, I actually ended up moving out to another job that was cushy and wonderful and awesome. But then when I finally knew, like, okay, it's time to really focus on speaking, I went to this conference in February of 2020 and was like, it's my time. This is it. Like this, Giselle, the seas are parting, the TikToks are talking, like this is this is what we've been waiting for. And then March of 2020 happened.
So
and all
crazy.
of a sudden, like are live events even going to happen anymore? Like, are we ever going to go out into the world anymore? Like, what are we going to do? And so that's how you mentioned my career accidentally started at my kitchen table. And it really did, because no, we didn't have live events anymore. But as fate would have it, it really ended up being my time. And learning how to capture attention in, say, a Zoom room without a professional camera, without lighting, without a team, learning how to create short form vertical videos on my phone, getting a point across in 60 seconds or less, which I know I dragged on that story, but we're in podcast long form, friends. Maybe we'll chop it up for the shorter version. And that's part of, the keynote 60 minutes versus the 60-second short form vertical video. But it taught me how to capture attention and hold attention. It taught me how to be more self-sufficient and scrappy. And it taught me how to find my real authentic voice in a way that I couldn't wearing that Banana Republic jumpsuit and in heels. So if nothing else, I hope that preliminary starter story inspired you, because even if you don't have the invitation or the opportunity to get on a stage right now, even though live events are back, you don't have to wait for someone to physically give you a microphone anymore. You have a microphone in your hand. It's called your phone. You carry it around and all the time. And there's so much power in that, where for even to this day, so for the first 2 years plus of my career, all of my opportunities have come either because somebody saw me on stage, they heard me in an interview, like a podcast or something of this nature, or they saw one of my videos. I didn't and still don't have a reel. We're finally getting to the point to where we have the time to work on that now. But it's simply that people felt like, okay, I've heard you speak in a live, unedited, unfiltered setting. I'm confident that you can bring that same energy and to the stage. And that's what's allowed for this ball to roll into what is now my career, and the dreams are coming true, and I'm so grateful.
It's such a cool story. And I want to take a step back even further of like, where did that stem from? You talked about, you had kind of like visualized this, you wanted to be a speaker, you manifested this happening, you were ambitious to reach out to Gary Vee's team. But like, was this something from like a young age you were really focused, or like, where did you tap into that? I want to be a speaker.
Well, I feel like to some extent, I've always been some kind of a performer. I grew up dancing my whole life. I did theater in high school. I could not sing a note for my life, but I loved being on stage. I loved being in front of an audience, especially with groups of people. And I also did pageants in high school, which was not something that I had planned on doing. But in high school, I had developed the dream of, I want to be a TV host. I want to be a presenter. I want to be a journalist or entertainment or red carpets. I didn't totally know how it was going to flesh out. But ultimately, it stemmed from me growing up in Minnesota, being a Mexican American, and I had never really been around anybody who looked like me. And the only time I ever saw people who looked like me were on occasion on TV. and and I really wanted to be what I didn't have when I was younger. I wanted to be that example. And I noticed that there were a lot of people who were holding microphones on TV, and their history was that they had done pageants or they did college news. And so even though pageants weren't really quote unquote my thing, what I didn't realize it did was I had to do interview practice, whether it was for the onstage interview or the private interview that you do with the judges before you get on stage. And it was some of the best training for college communication, jobs, even public speaking, where there's the Q&A portion, or podcasts where, they're asking you to think on your toes. And again, in those moments, and especially being so young, I feel like I initially wanted to tell them what I thought they wanted to hear. I didn't really know who I was and yet, but it was practice that I didn't even realize that I was getting in the form of communication. Like, you're asking me to think all the way back. I even remember when I was little and my parents would take us out to eat, or it was definitely a lot of drive-through. We had a lot of kids in our family. So my mom had this giant Suburban, and instead of her ordering for the car, she would pull up, like she would order her order, and then she would pull up and I would roll my window down in the back. and I would yell out my order to the person, or I would be the one who would order at the restaurant. She always was just finding ways to use our voices. And I don't think I realized what a superpower that was, or what an opportunity I had to be able to share that skill with other people until much later, when there were so many moments throughout my career where I felt like I didn't have a voice, or like someone was trying to silence me, or like my voice didn't really matter. And so we could get as deep as woo-woo as you want, but that's really where I felt like I wanted to be a voice that I didn't have. I wanted to be a face that I didn't have. And there were a lot of moments throughout my journey, in high school, in college, in my career, where I felt like I couldn't go on, or I felt like I was all alone, or like I didn't have anyone. And so there was always this fire in my heart of, if I ever get the chance, I want to be able to be that for someone else.
Mm.
And it turned into TV hosting, it turned into radio hosting. And I remember one time, one of my co-host asked the question to the group. He said, if you guys could be anything, like even the weirdest job, like the example that he gave was, he would be a professional buffalo wing taste tester, right? Like if you could literally be anything, like what would it be? And I was thinking about, like, what do I love doing? It's like, you know what? I think I would be a professional pep talker. Like, I think I would be like, I am totally the one who can like hype you up and make you feel good, and like anything is possible, and like it's going to be okay, both because of either my personal experiences or just my ability to be obnoxiously optimistic in any situation, and to like talk my way out of or into anything. And I didn't even really put two and two together that actually, wait a minute, it's been this like thread that has sort of followed me. I just didn't fully believe into my story until more recently. And I think that's kind of where it all comes from.
So then getting back up to kind of where you left off initially on the story. So you talked about, you're ready to go. It's COVID, March 2020, and then now what? But yet you have the persistence to keep going and find a way. And you recently posted on Instagram talking about the importance of aspiring speakers getting video out, and you touched on it earlier in this conversation. So what did that look like for you specifically? Like, were you starting to get events booked where you were doing them over Zoom, or was it just a matter of like, you were just getting a lot more video content out showing what you could do? What did that all look like?
Well, I absolutely believe if you feel like you have something that you want to share that could be helpful, or a story on your heart, or even if you've ever had that thought of, I wish more people knew about fill in the blank, that absolutely you should share it. Like, you have a service to the world to make it better, or your industry, or your legacy, or your family, to have an impact. And yes, absolutely, you could tell one person, and that's great. But how wonderful if you had some advice where maybe 10 people see it, maybe 100 people hear it, or you never know who could potentially be watching. And so I had started sharing on social media, honestly, almost 15 years ago at this point. I was putting videos up on YouTube, honestly, at that point, thinking that no one would see them. I wanted to be a TV host and nobody wanted to hire me. So I would make videos at home in my room, learning how to edit, learning how to use microphones, learning how to light, having no intention other than I wanted to get really, really comfortable. And it was too expensive for me to physically send out my demo reel and resume and folder, because that's how we used to do it 15 years ago. If you wanted someone to see you, you had to get into that audition room and maybe they would give you a chance. And all of a sudden I was like, wait, I could film a video and customize it, and I could copy and paste it and send it to the casting director, or send it, not even to the casting director, I could send it straight to the head of production, or to the news director, or to the head of the company. Like, what? Like that's why it was like it was like I was going straight to the front of the line in a way that a lot of people just couldn't grasp that. And so that's where my practice with video came from, is because initially my intention was, I want to be on TV. So I feel like first and foremost, anytime that I've ever posted content, or even anytime that I've ever posted a video, it's been with an intention. So that's something that I want you to think about as you're listening to this podcast, or as you're posting content, or as you're posting social media, or even as you're scrolling through social media. What's my intention? Like, why am I doing this? Who am I hoping will see this? For me, it was, I'm hoping that a news director will see this and cast me as a host, or now as a speaker. I'm hoping an event planner will see this, or another speaker will see this, or a meeting planner will see this, and they'll go, oh, wait, we need a speaker. Let's go with Giselle. And so I was posting these videos with the intention of, I want to get more comfortable finding my voice. I want to be able to give people value in that. At the time, and in March of 2020, what I was predominantly talking about online was using video to connect with people. Where let's just go back to that traumatic time in our lives when we had no idea what in the world was going to happen and next. And we didn't know what was going to happen to our jobs or to the businesses that we love, or even at the grocery store. And, God forbid we run out of toilet paper. And so at that time, I was working at an advertising agency, and we had so many businesses who their budgets had been cut or became non-existent. And so I was wanting to show them, and also all of the people who were not our clients, but who desperately needed to connect with their customers, hey, let me show you what you can do using tools you already have without having to leave your house or risk your health or hire a team. Let me show you how some of these social media platforms work and the potential that is here for you to connect on a deeper level and for people to still know who you are, and in a really targeted way. That was initially my intention. But what I realized, and again, like I think some of our superpowers, like even you as a speaker, whether it's your voice or your personality, or you're trying to figure out what keynote do I want to share? What story do I want to share? What topic do I want to talk about? Like, even as you and I are going through these questions, I have to remind myself there are some things that for me, I already either put my 1,000 hours into, or I don't even realize are my superpowers because they're so obvious. And I have to like go in there and really break it down and realize like, oh, wait, what's been inside of me here all along? Like, this is what it was. So I didn't realize that talking to people about how they could use video and social media and their face and their voice, I didn't realize like how just not normal that was for so many people, because I had been doing it at that point for over 10 years and had found my voice after 10 years, where that little girl in her room 10, 15 years ago was so vanilla and so green and had no personality and was so awkward and trying to be something that she wasn't. Same thing how, the girl in the Banana Republic jumpsuit came back all again in our imposter syndrome that we face when we're hitting to that next level. And so I was creating videos where I was simply giving my perspective, giving my opinion on something that I was so excited about and passionate about and knew a little something about. I didn't know everything about it, but I knew a little bit more than the average person because, March 2020 still felt pretty early. Short form vertical video hadn't hit Instagram yet, or YouTube yet, or LinkedIn, or Facebook as we know it and today. And so I was simply talking about something that I already knew about and was excited about, and creating a community over there. And long story longer, from those types of videos, I got some really influential followers, because what we're experiencing on every single platform now, every platform on social media, if your profile is public, it is guaranteed that your content will be seen by people who don't follow you. That's pretty awesome. Like, that's pretty cool, because previously you had to pay for that. Only your followers would see your content and in the order that it was posted. Now you could post something to LinkedIn today. Maybe I'll see it in a week. Maybe I'll see it in 2 weeks, or maybe I'll see it because one of our mutual friends commented on it and all of a sudden it repopulated to my feed. And so what ended up happening was I had meeting planners and event planners and brands and even people from TikTok who saw my content. And they said, oh my gosh, we need someone like you, because you're someone who, you understand TikTok. You're not dancing. You're not lip syncing, which that was so the scenario that so many people had in their head of that's all that is. And so I was someone who was brought in even to TikTok to explain some of the ways that businesses and even creators could optimize their relationships and their presence using that platform. And it's just little by little, like every single time that you have an opportunity, it will give you a lesson, or it will give you an introduction, or potentially a testimonial, or all of the above, where one little nugget leads to the next. And social media can also be something that keeps you top of mind with those people, whether or not that they are ready for you. Because there were a few people who followed me and I got really excited because there were maybe verified people or entrepreneurs who I looked up to or business leaders who I looked up to. And we would have maybe a couple of exchanges in the DMs, or maybe not. But I would continue to make content and continue to do what I did. And maybe they weren't thinking of me then, but a year later, wait, oh my gosh, I don't know why I didn't think of you, Giselle, but we have this virtual event coming up. Will you please come? And it's all about just natural, organic building of relationships where, yes, it started out as, will you come on our Zoom call? And maybe it was a group call or a coaching call, or will you come on this podcast? Or will you please do a webinar for our virtual event? And then all of a sudden, as real life events started coming back, you were so great at our virtual event. Will you come and do it in person? Or, oh my gosh, I saw you on that Zoom call. I was in the audience. Can you please come and do that in person? Or, oh my gosh, I saw that training that you did for TikTok. Will you come and do that with my team? And it has been this contagiously referral-based business that has been optimized by that power of video and that power of connection, where hopefully what you see online matches, if not exceeds, matches what you're going to see offline. If not, what happens offline will exceed even what you experience online.
Another one of the cool things that you shared about recently was the fact that you customize your presentation. There's no duplicate of, okay, I saw Giselle at this event, therefore it's going to be a cookie cutter version at this other event that she's speaking at. First off, why? Why do you think that's important to make these unique presentations? And then what does that process look like to ensure that you're customizing to the right audience?
Absolutely. So I didn't realize this, but I really went about my speaking career the very non-traditional route. There are a lot of speakers who are wonderful, and they go very traditional, where they build up their marketing and their reel and their website, and they go through bureaus or agents or managers, and there's nothing wrong with that. I was simply reacting to the opportunities that I was getting and doing the best that I could. And mind you, I had 10 previous years of my own representation as a TV host and as a radio host and as somebody who worked with brands. I had all of that behind me, whereas not everybody has that type of experience. And so your goals or your starting off points might be a little different. Or some bad advice that I think is good advice that I give is no, try doing it all yourself first. So then that way you can see what actually goes into it and you can fall on your face. And then from there, figure out who's actually worthy of your time and attention and commission. But again, there's no single way to do it. And so that being said, as I was, figuring it all out, I didn't realize that a lot of speakers give the exact same presentation over and over and over again. And there's honestly nothing wrong with that. That actually sounds great. That sounds really, wonderful. And I don't think easy is the right word, because if you make it look easy, it's because you put a lot of hard work into it. But there are a lot of people who give the exact same talk. And there are a lot of event planners who they want to buy your talk. If you're going to hire Taylor Swift actually Taylor Swift would probably be an exception to this. But if you're going to hire like an artist who you know and love, like you want them to play the hits. You don't want to hear songs that you've never heard before. Or, even with comedians, they do a lot of it. They have a set, they have a set thing. And so for me, I definitely have a few stories that I absolutely pull out of my pocket or that I have repeated. But I was, for even still, customizing a lot of different presentations, the beginning, the middle, the end, the content, the type of content, the exercises, the workshops, because I, as a coach, things are a little different. A lot of speakers don't have the same practice that I do, where I have groups that I coach every week. I get to trial new material all the time. So where another speaker might say, oh yeah, I'm going to try some new material on stage, an event planner would be like, are you kidding me? Like, no, we're not going to try something new. Like, I try out new content and I feed it to my audience first, my followers first, my clients first, my group coaching clients first. And I'm constantly practicing and oiling up my machine. And it's what allows for me to do some of that improvisation, and to divert from the slides and know that like I'm going to read your audience and well, I'm going to give them what they need. Not everybody can do that. Not everybody wants to do that. And that's more than and perfectly okay. But at the very least, even if you are delivering the exact same keynote presentation every single time, I beg of you to do research on your audience, to do research on the brand that you're speaking to, and try to find ways that you can acknowledge them in your presentation. Even if, for example, you are giving a whole presentation about sales, cool. Give us examples of, or even say the word selling houses or real estate agents, or some way that you're letting the audience know, I know who you are, I see you, and I've done my research at the very like minimal least. Because for example, I saw a speaker who came to a real estate conference that I went to earlier this year. And he is opening up and telling his story. And one of the examples that he used was seeing a CEO walking around your office or something to that nature. But I'm thinking like, friend, you're in a room full of real estate agents. Like, CEO walking around your office, what are you talking about? Like, most of these agents aren't even going to a physical office. Like, in fact, a lot of them are under the play of, if you're in the office, you're not actually doing your job. So what are you talking about? Like, CEO walking around your office, that doesn't even make sense. Like let's give them a little bit of something. Like, even if you're talking about love, life, and happiness and your bucket list, like if there's anything that you can do, the next step up might be for one of your examples, maybe using real people in the audience, or acknowledging your event planner, or acknowledging just the leader of your organization. So that, again, that way people feel like, okay, this person gets us. And that was one of the best compliments that I got recently. Was I went to Austin, and it was an annual conference. And afterwards, the president, who I'd never met before, she came up to me and she was like, oh my gosh, everybody was talking about you. I had to double check and make sure that you didn't work for our organization, because I thought you were one of us. Like, I fully thought that like that you were one of us. Like, you clearly did your homework, and I felt like you were talking to me. And that's simply the difference between good and great, or maybe even that's the difference between, I think, like good and like really, really great, which again, those are some of the things that I don't know how not to do that. I didn't realize that it was so significant. Where I remember I was getting off of a call with a colleague, and I, said, what's a mistake that you've made lately? And he said, oh, I didn't customize. And I'm like, what? What do you mean? Like, what? He's like, yeah, I was giving and he told me the story, and I'm like, I'm so confused. What do you mean you didn't customize? Like, the best way that I can put it is that is the difference between you talking to an audience versus talking at an audience. And there are a lot of people who call themselves speakers who talk at an audience or simply do a performance versus talking to a group of people. And that's what can set you apart. So I recommend, do your research, know who you're talking to, ask the event planner, the meeting planner, even if, for example, like even you and I, how you came on a call that I had with Remax Canada. And that was like one of 3 different calls that I took with different people throughout the organization, and was asking even people in the community or my driver going to the hotel, hey, what's Canada's perception of real estate? What's the perception? Like, what do people actually think? What are the headlines saying? How is it different from what I experienced in the US? Or I did a keynote in Spain, where in the US, the way that we do grading is with letters, like in school, like, in middle school and in high school, and even in college or university. And we go A, B, C, D, E, F. And I was using that as a reference. And I was like, by the way, like, would you know what I would mean if I said I got a B in Spanish, because I was giving a keynote in Spanish? And he was like, oh yeah, we don't do letters here. Like, we do numbers.
Wow.
And so even just knowing little nuances like that, of like, oh, no way. And so I was able to, in my keynote, say, I got a B in Spanish, but say, which is the equivalent of like a 5 in your terms. And those are little things where it just allows for them to feel like, okay, even if she isn't from here, she's taken some time to get to know us, and it just makes all of the difference in the world. Read the news, read the headlines, take some meetings, or at the very least, just try to read the room. Try to read the
Totally.
room.
Well, it's so interesting, and I think that's such good advice because, you kind of laid out the bare minimum there, use the terminology and the jargon and that is typical for the industry. And you're right, because sometimes an audience will hear a term and, for example, sticking on real estate, escrow isn't a thing in Canada. And so when
Right.
we hear that term, instantly there might be this guard. It could be an amazing speech, but if that one term could turn the audience off. And then I really like your idea there about, scheduling some calls to do this research, especially with the people who are leaders within the organization. But to break this down even further, what does it look like for the way you're building? Because you do have some slides in your presentation. Do you have just kind of a set deck or a few set PowerPoint decks and then you customize from there? Or like when you're putting together these custom presentations, are you starting from scratch each time? What does that look like?
Really good question. I am adding a little bit more structure into my repertoire, but truth be told, slides are not my love language, and I was very, very resistant. And so for me, it used to actually be that my flip chart was my best friend on that stage. I wouldn't even use any slides. I would just go straight to flip chart. But what I noticed was I was telling a story last summer about my dad. And I feel like simply talking about my dad can absolutely move the room. When it comes to parents, when it comes to family, it can move the room. But it just so happened that as I was preparing for it and even telling my dad about it, I had like a very distinct picture in my head, and I decided on that particular instance to share a slide that had a picture of me and my dad. And what a difference it made to elevate an already great story. And so it was then that I had a moment where it was a flicker of, okay, you know what? Like maybe there are some different ways that for me and for my style that I can use this to actually add to my conversation versus again going back to what I've done in the past where I've tried to do speaker versus be speaker. Like I was doing it for the wrong reasons, because that's happened a lot where I will see a friend of mine, her name is Jara. She's a great follow, Jara Bean, and she's a former graphic designer. Everything that she does is beautiful because for her, creative is her love language. And she will put together the most gorgeous, organized, colorful, vibrant slide deck. And I would watch her giving a presentation and just look at her slide deck and feel so inadequate. Or very recently, I saw one where this speaker was talking about AI and he had this whole deck that was created from graphics that he put in, had AI created. And I remember thinking like, oh God, those slides are so cool. Like, why can't I do that? And so for me, it even is like I'm in the middle of that, even figuring out like what is my slide balance? Like where could I use slides in a way that can actually take me a step further? Where there were totally moments, even recently with the one that I did in Remax, where I was using some new slides and I was like, yeah, like that's fine, but it was like that was too much. Like that was unnecessary. Where it's like what acts as a visual aid to different types of learning styles versus what do you get lost in or ends up taking away some of, for me personally, my personality. And so at this point, I now do have, I make all of my slides inside of Canva for better or for worse. I'm not again, slides aren't my love language. So I can't say, I recommend it. You should totally do it. It's simply what's allowed for me, a non-visual graphic creative person, to make something that looks at least kind of decent. And so I have about maybe 10-ish slides where I've noticed like, okay, you know what, this thought's come up a few times, or you know what, this story has come up a few times. And I will weave in and out of some of those moments that I can then copy and paste and pull and use to then be able to put together a custom presentation. Or same thing with, I have a few different notes in my notes app where I have a whole one just called stories. And for me, it's stories that I pull from. It's personal stories, personal examples, client stories, just to keep fresh and top of mind. Because sometimes, our brain forgets, especially as we get older, especially as we get tired to go on the road. And I keep that list of stories either as they newly happen or as I remember them or as I test them on on the stage, because sometimes the story falls flat. Sometimes the story, you could do better, or you remember something else. And so those are just little ways that help with the way that my brain works, of making something that has some structure, even though it isn't completely scheduled and planned.
You get nervous before you present?
Always. Always. I usually have a time where I want to wake up and I tell myself I'm going to wake up, and I kid you not, Wade, I usually end up spending about an hour completely frozen in bed. Like,
Wow.
cannot move, am completely paralyzed. Want to get up but can't, like want to be able to disappear into the bed and like just stay there and forever. I have pacing moments. I question everything I'm about to say. I question if I deserve to even be there at all. I feel like I'm going to pee, but I don't know if I actually have to pee or if it's just nerves. And then usually right before I go on stage, I get extremely calm and I just breathe it in, and I'm able to transform the excitement into, or transform the nerves and the imposter syndrome into excitement, and shift that mindset of, I deserve to be here. I'm so excited to be here. It's an honor to be here. But I feel like if the nerves didn't happen, like, to me, the nerves means I care. To me, the nerves means I want to do a really good job. To me, the nerves means, because I've also noticed that I get more nervous when I know people in the audience. And it used to be that only meant if it was like a client or a family member. But now, because of the relationship that I tend to build with my client, I sometimes do feel like, oh, I have quote unquote fans in the audience, or I have partners in the audience, or I have, a family of new friends in the audience. And so I almost feel as if you'd think that the nerves have started to go away. I feel like the nerves are actually getting stronger. The difference is that the flip is also stronger, where it's, I know I can do this. I know I'm capable. I know I'm going to make an impact. I know that somebody is going to take something away from this. And even if it's just one person who leaves here feeling captivated or inspired or better than when they walked in, then that is a win for me. And I always, even in those moments, like, I did my last keynote of the year last week, and I walked off that stage being like, oh my God, I crushed like all of the expletives, like all of the, I crushed that. And then like an hour later, I started having the thoughts come in of like, you know what, next time I want to do it this way. You know what, I kind of wish I would have done it this way. And I can think of 40 different things that I would have done differently. And it's not a but, it's an and. It's, you know what, Giselle, you did crush. And also, next time, let's play with this one, or let's go in that direction, or let's try to do it this way. And that is, I believe, a beautiful place to be, where it's not living in the past of, I would have, should have done that, but it's no. Let's live in a place of abundance. You're going to get this chance again. How are we going to do it differently and or better and or improve or switch it up or change it up? And I believe that those nerves are absolutely healthy, because it means that you care, you haven't done that before, you care about somebody in there, like you just know that you're about to do something that's really, really awesome. And it's a great place to be.
I love that perspective. And I think it's probably refreshing for people to hear, because this is the thing, is that most people, maybe not every single person, but most people do get those nerves before taking the stage. It's why they say, some people have a bigger fear of public speaking than dying, which is insane. But this is a
Yeah.
common fear that we have. And so to hear that someone at your caliber is experiencing that as well, to that level, but is able to channel that energy in a positive way. And I love the outlook at the end of, it's okay, like this, sure, this could have been improved, but I still did an awesome job. My next question is with regard to kind of the preparation process. So let's say you have a keynote gig that is scheduled. Are you rehearsing that whole thing days before? are there enough of these stories that you've told before? Like, what does your practice routine look like before a speaking opportunity?
Yeah, and I even want to add um even the element of importance and like how I get to that calm place, and even the preparation part, always putting the audience first.
Hmm.
Because even those moments where I might be nervous of oh my gosh, so and so's in the audience, or this person, it's thinking about, okay, is that person the exception or the rule? Because yes, for example, the event planner hired you, but who's your audience? What level are they at? Like, maybe the people in the front row are super advanced, but what's the general audience? Like, what level are they at? And when you get into your head of, oh my gosh, I don't know if I deserve to be here, what helps me so much, even sometimes in that moment when I hit that stage, is taking a breath and reminding myself, it's not about you, it's about who you're serving and your people. And so part of even my process of practice is constantly reminding myself of that, of like, who am I trying to reach? Because even last week I had again, the whole front row was VIPs, and some of these were some of the most influential people in the industry. Some of them were, they're from reality shows and the Instagrams and the TikToks, whatever. And I had to remind myself, like, yes, they are awesome. And yes, you are fangirling, but they are not, like, they're the exception. They're not the rule. Like, we're serving everybody else who's in the back row, who's hiding in the back, who's still too scared to show up, so again, part of that is even training my brain as I'm getting nervous days ahead, so that way when I'm on stage, if ever there's a moment where I lose my train of thought or I get that butterfly, it's breathing and just reminding myself of that groundedness. As far as practicing and rehearsing, I am constantly practicing stories. I'm constantly practicing little lessons and exercises, and in different ways. And sometimes it's honestly as simple as, and this is something anyone can do, no matter what level you're at. Sometimes it is practicing a story at the dinner table or with my
Hmm.
friends, saying, oh my God, you're not going to believe what happened to me on the airplane yesterday. And telling a story, because that's how your story should feel on that stage. You should be using your normal voice. Sometimes what happens is, there are some people who they write their keynotes, and that's fine. Great. If you want to write out your whole keynote like an essay or get help from ChatGPT, that's like great. You need to do whatever your brain needs to do. Again, that's not how my brain works, but if that's how yours does, you do whatever you need to do. But written word is very different from spoken word. So my suggestion would be use a tool like otter.ai, for example, where it transcribes your words and then can format it into a document. So then that way you can see how you actually talk.
Hmm.
And so I will practice stories out on Friends. I will practice stories out on Instagram stories, where it disappears after 24 hours and I can, take longer than a minute for my reels. I will also sometimes practice my stories in my hotel room or in my head or in my shower. And the reason for that, so timing is always really important. And so I have a couple of stories where I might have a 15-minute version or a 10-minute version or a 5-minute version. Or it's one of those stories where I go, okay, if I need to fill time, this is a great filler. Or okay, if I need to cut that one out, I can cut it shorter. So just for fun, even on like a Wednesday night, if I'm all alone, I will pull out my phone and turn on the timer and practice a story just to see how long it takes me, or if it feels long. And then when it comes to my keynotes, every now and then I will practice something from beginning to end, because from experience, even in dance, I grew up dancing. And one of the things that we would sometimes do in dance is we would have this process called marking it. What marking it means, if you're not familiar, is when, for example, instead of doing like a triple turn, I would just close my hands and imagine myself twirling 3 times. But if you never do the turn full out, what happened one time when I was on the football field in front of thousands of people, I got so used to marking it, where I would just stand with my leg up and count to 3 with my hands, that all of a sudden I noticed all the girls were turning and facing me, and I was the only one facing them doing the marked version
Right, right.
versus doing it full out. And so I've noticed that a couple times where sometimes when I'm going through a keynote and what I've made a mistake for in the past is I'll only practice what I think are the quote unquote hard moments or the really big stories, not even realizing, wait a minute, how am I going to transition? Or like, wait, I thought I knew this lesson like the back of my hand, but I'm actually a little rusty. And so like granted, not every keynote is the same. There are absolutely some stories that I tell more than others that are pretty sharp and that I know, like the back of my hand. And ultimately, like you shouldn't talk about anything that you don't really know and well. And that's another piece of advice that I would give to you that I learned by accident, which was I, my first keynotes, as I mentioned, like they were in my kitchen and I wasn't screen sharing a PowerPoint presentation. And then once I was given opportunities, there were so many instances where I wasn't in a room that had high production value or lights or screens and LEDs. Like I was in, a room that could maybe fit 30 people with like bad lighting and no screens. And so I would challenge you, like, could you do your presentation unplugged? Could you do your presentation without slides? Like you hope that never happens to you, but like could you do it? There are a lot of speakers that rely on confidence monitors, which I didn't even know what a confidence monitor was until just this year, which is when you can put notes on the slides in front of you on a very highly produced stage. And there are a lot of people that like fully and heavily rely on those things. And so I don't even realize that I'm doing it subconsciously, but I'm practicing constantly, even when I'm not actually practicing. And I do attempt to do at least half, if not full, run throughs beforehand. But there have absolutely been moments where, with my style personally, I've been, you know, I've improvised, or maybe I go a little rogue, or oh, hi, my dog just decided to come and visit. Welcome, welcome,
Aw.
welcome back to the channel, Penelope Cruz, everyone.
Aw, so cute.
And so absolutely there have been moments where I've started with a different story, or I felt moved, like I feel like someone needs to hear this story, or we go in a different direction. And that's just something for me, I think, coming from that place of live television and live internet and live podcast or live Zoom, where I know that if I'm going to do that, that I know how to take the audience with me versus make it about me.
You have another rule that you don't drink 72
Mm.
hours before presenting, which, I mean, yeah, it sounds like a great rule, but I think what people need to remember sometimes is that often, speaking opportunities happen at these conferences. There may be like networking aspects sometimes that are involved. So, it does take some discipline to stick by that. Why is that important to you?
I heard a podcast a few years ago between Holly Whitaker and Melissa Urban. And Holly Whitaker is the founder of a brand called Tempest. She's also the author of a book called Quit Like a Woman. And she posed the question of, what is keeping you from achieving your dreams, ... wait for it, as quickly as you would like.
Hmm.
Like, what's keeping you from achieving your dreams, not period, but as quickly as you would like? And it really hit me in a way where I thought, what's slowing me down? Like, what is really slowing me down? And I noticed that, for example, if I go out drinking on a Friday or a Saturday, or both, especially, which I'm not a big drinker, I'm not a daily drinker, but I would notice that, like, even if I went out on a Friday, okay, Saturday I'm hungover all day. Sunday I'm still a little groggy. And Monday, even there's like a little fog sometimes. And when I really think about, okay, if I'm losing at least a Saturday every single month, like a full Saturday or a full Saturday and a Sunday, like that's a full week out of every month. That's a full week that I'm losing. And if I'm getting frustrated at my progress, a really easy adjustment that I can make is to quit drinking. And when I really think about what does it take for me to be on my A game, it's that I need my brain to be clear. And I also recognize, like, okay, so alcohol is one, sleep is another. I noticed how even after a glass of wine, I got an Aura ring, which is a wearable piece of technology that can track how you sleep. I noticed how even after just one glass of wine, I would sleep horribly, like just horribly. And so that's where, oh, hi, mom. My mom's fine. I'm home for the holidays.
Got a couple
So,
cameos. I love it.
well, a couple cameos, this is real. We're authentic. And so that was something for me that really had me re-examining my relationship with alcohol, where again, like I didn't see myself as being an alcoholic or having a problem, but I felt like it was slowing me down. And at times I felt like I was totally misusing it. And it really forced me to reevaluate my relationship with it completely. So I gave it up entirely when I first started my business. And without realizing it, that took it to another level where I had to go through wedding season completely sober. Like, you want to learn something about yourself, go through a whole wedding season sober. And I all of a sudden realized like where I was maybe numbing myself or masking insecurity. I didn't think that I was someone who had social anxiety. And all of a sudden I realized, oh my God, I have social anxiety. Like, I'm dreading going to this thing, or I don't know how to leave a conversation, or I'm fully reliant on like going back to the bar. And I feel like that's networking for a lot of people. We don't even realize it. Like, the first thing we crave is I want to go to the bar, I want a wine, I want a beer, I want to, so many of those pieces. And what has been really awesome for me is even in those networking situations, how wonderful it is when I'm able to be fully present in a conversation. How wonderful it is when I can totally leave when the party is getting fun and be like, you know what, I'm going to go, like, cool. It's also been a lot of conversations started of like, oh, wait, you're not drinking? Tell me more. Like, there are a lot of people who are very, very curious. And I was recently at a real estate conference where one of the MCs actually asked me a very similar question. Or before even she asked the audience, she said, who of you would you not drink if you weren't in real estate? And there were so many hands that went up.
Wow.
And it makes you wonder, like, wait, really? Like, it's that much. Like, it's really that much, whether it's that you're that stressed or you're that anxious or you don't like talking to people. And that's where I go, like, listen, there's nothing wrong with alcohol unless it doesn't feel right and for you, or it's slowing you down from doing what you actually want to do. And so that for me, I feel like, I even noticed over the summer where I have that rule of, well, if I don't have to be on my A game in 72 hours, like, okay, cool, I'll drink. And I usually take July off. So I found myself starting to drink for the summer, like, oh yeah, let's go on a patio. Let's, Sunday fun day, let's brunch. And I all of a sudden realized, after not having been drinking for the 6-month sprint that I was on, like, I was like, wow, I really don't like how I feel. Like, I don't like this feeling. I don't like the anxiety that's coming. I don't like the insecurities that are coming up. And so, if you're listening to this right now and any of these bulbs are going off, like, consider leaning into it again at your own pace, on your own journey. What I really love about that Tempest brand is they don't have like an all or nothing idea that a lot of people do around sobriety or people who are in recovery, which again, if that's your journey, go for it. But they really value you taking your own journey and really just, again, exploring and seeing like, all right, what's happening in that brain that's making you feel like this is what you're, again, supposed to do, versus like, what are you really, really wanting to do, and how can you get there faster?
Well, and I think where that's super relevant as well is that, we've mostly been talking about those people who are aspiring speakers on a high level, like want to be keynotes, that type of thing. But if we take it to a more likelihood for that many people might experience, is that at some point in their lives, they might have the chance to give a speech or something at like a wedding or that type of circumstance. And I think sometimes there's this belief that like, oh, I can have a few drinks, just wing it. And the point you brought up earlier about like, even after a glass of wine, like it impacts your ability to think clearly. So I think, yeah, that hits on a lot of really good points there. One thing I'm curious about, Giselle, is you've spoke to quite a few different audiences. Have you had an instance where you're presenting and you're like, shit, this is not hitting, it's not resonating with this audience? And then how did you deal with that situation in the moment?
Absolutely. I've had those moments. And interestingly enough, I think more than half of the time it's in my head.
Huh.
um, where I'm like, oh, this feels weird. This isn't great. One of the pieces of empathy that you will learn being a speaker, like once you finally put yourself in that arena, you recognize how valuable your energy as someone in the audience is. And so now I'm someone who, you know, if the speaker asks me to participate, as long as it isn't annoying and self-serving, I will totally participate. Like I will throw my hands, I'll scream, I'll clap, I'll hug the person next to me. I'll dance when the music is there because I know how valuable that energy is. And to have to be the one who is like the only ounce of energy, there's nothing more terrifying and exhausting. And I can do it at this point and I can bring it up and I can wake up an audience, but that's definitely been something that for me has been rough. And I feel like as far as like what did I do and to bring it back, you want to continue to just have your head in the game like always. You can't just give up or walk away, but you also want to have in your pocket, all right, I call it like a pattern interruption. Which pattern interruption, it's usually a production term. It means that maybe there's a camera angle or a cut or an edit that all of a sudden brings your attention back. And what does that look like? Is it making a joke about something or someone? Or I didn't think that it was anything significant where it wasn't a matter of me losing the audience. But when I was in Canada with you, the comment that people made the most afterwards was they loved a joke that I made about my pants, which I didn't even realize like I had made a joke about my pants, but I was wearing these patent leather leggings that they totally make squeaky noises when either my legs rub together or when I walk. And I made a joke about how like I wore my squeaky pants just for you. And apparently that was something that just like when you think about Ferris Bueller and how he does what's called breaking the fifth wall, where he goes from being in the movie to like talking to the audience. Like sometimes those moments can either make it light or just prove that you're a human or make someone laugh or just again just okay, let's bring it back. I feel like those are some ways that you can potentially get yourself out of it or even get your head back into it of having a little bit of that interaction. And then again, it always goes back to, all right, if we lost them at this point, afterwards, when you're done, let's figure out why. Like what was it? Was it that the story was too long? Was it that we said something in a way that we shouldn't have? Was it that like, you know, your hands were too distracting or you were walking around too much? But like, what was it? And is it that we need to get rid of the story? Is it that we need to change the story? I think it's so important to watch game tape, as I call it. Like I hate it more than anything, by the way. Like I hate watching myself on stage. And I've also found that if I watch it immediately, I will find everything that's wrong. If I wait a few months, all of a sudden I'm a lot nicer to myself.
Interesting.
So sometimes you have to let it marinate a little bit. But I think, you know, reviewing the footage is always going to help you. And again, reminding you that the audience is human and having some potential like choose your own adventure moments in your head of like where you could go if you happen to lose them.
So talking about kind of recapturing the audience's attention, I mean, you just mentioned there, humor's a great way of doing that, like injecting something to get them laughing, some sort of joke, that might be the memorable thing. A couple other things that come to mind are things like body language or maybe like your vocal tone, like changing it like high, low, that type of thing. You're somebody who kind of uses the full stage. You move constantly. Is that intentional? And like as you're building your speech, are you mindful of those two things of like changes in your voice and the tone to kind of recapture the audience's attention as well?
For better and especially the worst, Wade, I feel like I don't even know what happens with my body when I'm up there. Which so it's funny because I made a video a while ago that that got a lot of views where I talked about like what not to do with your hands in terms of videos. And in it, like when I talk about like what not to do with your hands, it's more so about like what are you doing either because you think that it is like you think that you're supposed to do it or you're doing it because you are nervous.
Hmm.
I talk with my hands. Like if you're watching this in the video, like I'm using my hands to talk. This is the way that I would talk and in person. I'm not doing this because I'm nervous or because I don't know what to do with my hands. This is just simply how my mind and body work together. And I mentioned I'm a performer, I'm a dancer. So for me, like I am an animated individual. And I think where some people make the mistake is they fully choreograph every single move and, and point and thing. And some people can do it and really well. And some people do it and it feels very inauthentic and not great. And so that being said, in terms of me moving all over the stage, there are absolutely moments where I am being as authentic to myself as I can. And I still will watch footage back and go, you know what? I should sit still for this part of the story. Or, you know what? Maybe I'll move for this part of the story. And there are little things like I love watching other speakers. I love watching other speakers. And I was once watching my friend Seth Madison, where he was actually giving a talk about body language, and where he was talking about how sometimes you can be really strategic about the way that you move about the stage in terms of telling a story, whether it's a before and an after, or beginning, middle, end, how you can start on one side for the first part of the story and then move your way so that it feels more intentional and graceful in those moments where you want to move but have intention. So all of that is to say, some of it is thoughtful. I wouldn't say scripted or choreographed. Some of it is thoughtful, and some of it is my genuine passion, where I do things with my feet and hands. Like sometimes I'll do little low kicks because again, I'm a dancer, or I'll do like little snap moments that I do in real life too. And those are things that some of them are natural and some of them are caught and taught.
We're getting close to the end of the conversation. Giselle, there's been so much value already added.
I hope so.
In a second, I'm going to ask you 3 questions that I intend on asking every guest of future Keys from Keynotes interviews. We'll get there in a second, but before, I have one last question, and that has to do with audience Q&A, and where I think that this is maybe a little bit different than a speech or something that you kind of have in mind what you're going to talk about. It's of course that you don't know the questions that might be coming from the audience. To make this kind of a 2-part question, question number 1, is that something you embrace when you're a speaker? Like, do you open it up to audience questions and allow that, or make that part of your presentation? And the second part is, how do you deal with difficult questions where they almost stump you for a moment and you maybe don't know the answer in that moment?
I love it. I want to get stumped. And not everybody does. Like not everybody wants that. Not everybody feels comfortable. Some of the practice that I've gotten over the years has been from going live on Instagram. It's been for a moment, there was a hot social media app called Clubhouse.
Right.
And I would get to test and trial questions and all the time. I've noticed over time that there are a lot of questions that I get over and over and over, and I turn that into content. And I love the opportunity to get stumped, because no, I'm not going to answer a question that I don't have the answer to yet. And I'm not afraid to say that. You know what? I never really thought about it that way. Let me get back to you. Or, you know what? I don't think I have an answer to that. Does anybody else? Or that's a good one. I think I'm going to need more than a couple of seconds to think that one through. But the other piece of it too is that I don't just call myself a coach. I went through extensive training, hours, weeks of training and trials and schooling, as well as having thousands of hours with clients. And my job as a coach is to ask good questions. And so I also love sourcing for questions from the audience, where it's a matter of seeing how people ask questions, because that's an area that I even get rusty as a coach. So I love pulling from that. And so personally, I love doing Q&A when it's available to me. And, but I know plenty of speakers who don't do it, or who don't feel comfortable, and who want to get familiar with their material first. And so I would say never do a Q&A unless you are confident in your material and confident in your audience. But if for some of my, even, I represent speakers as well. I have some speakers who they're like, I don't want to go unless there's a Q&A, because for them, the keynote is where they're a little stiff and the Q&A is where they come alive. And it's an opportunity to really engage with the people who ultimately you're doing this for. It's some of the best research that you can do as a speaker in seeing the questions that they have or don't have afterwards, and whether or not you want to tweak your presentation as a result of, or maybe you even recognize, wow, I thought I needed to be the advanced level of this, but their questions are so basic. I gotta bring my presentation material down even further to be able to accommodate.
Such a good point. Well, as I mentioned, 3 questions I'm going to ask
Let's
every
go.
guest of this interview series. So the first one is, who is your favorite keynote speaker?
I have so many, and I also love watching comedians.
Oh,
So, and I study speakers all the time. So I love watching Netflix and YouTube to see speakers. Erwin McManus was the pastor at my church in LA. He's one of my favorite speakers who I pulled from. Also, Rachel Hollis was someone who I saw her and I had never seen a woman talk like she did. She's been kind of out of the spotlight for a little while, but she honestly was someone who, for me, Brene Brown, also someone who she just has a different tone and she's so wonderful. Mel Robbins as well. Tony Robbins, of course, like one of the greats by far. And I love watching the storytelling of comedians on Netflix. Like there are so many different Netflix specials where you see different ways that they tell stories or break their character or interact with the crowd that I think is so brilliant. And that's absolutely where I pull in like inspiration from. And I love watching my peers on the road. My mentor Ryan Leake, who I love and adore, and Seth Madison, who's just wonderful and someone who's really gone up about this, so much more traditionally. Those are people who I just adore and love and feel so lucky that, like, oh my gosh, they're my friends now. What? It's wild.
so cool. Question number 2. What is your most embarrassing speaking moment?
I had to think about this one because I don't embarrass easily. I mean, I wear pants that squeak. So I embrace the sweat and the insecurity always. But I do recall I was at Inman back in January in New York, and I was moderating a panel. And I'm known for my pants. Like, in case you didn't catch it the first time, I have these patent leather pants that people love and that make funny noises. But I also had these sequin ones that I was so excited to bring out for Inman. Like, they were fully sequin, sparkly black. And I didn't realize it, but when I crossed my legs, they got stuck together. So when I got up, they were stuck in 3 different places, and I had to stay on stage and like physically pull the beads from like all the different areas of my legs to get unstuck before I could walk off. But always laugh off the moments, but definitely did a wardrobe change after that one, and luckily packed extra pants.
Love it. Such a
Yeah.
good answer. And final
Yeah.
question, if you could speak at any venue in the world, where would it be?
For me, it's less about venue and more about the company and the presence. So one speaker who I fully forgot to mention and shouldn't have, I absolutely want to and will share the stage with Brennan Burchard. He is someone who I am totally a product of his coaching and witnessing him as a coach, as a performer, as a speaker, as a teacher, as a storyteller. And I want to be at one of his events as a speaker and an example. And at one of his events, actually in February of 2020, Jamie Kern-Lima, who was the CEO of IT Cosmetics, had a $1 billion exit, billion with a B. She was sitting in the front row of one of his events, and I went up to her to take a picture, and I told her wholeheartedly, unwaveringly, I cannot wait to share the stage with you one day. And the next day during her keynote, she actually called me out and she said, "Where's Giselle Ugarte?" She told me that she's going to share the stage with me one day, and I believe her. And so those are 2 people who I cannot wait to, at some point, and no matter where they are, I know the venue is going to be amazing. I know the audience is going to be amazing. I know we're going to impact so many people, but they are my venue. They are that. And then also, I mean, Madison Square Garden. I mean, hey, like, look, let's go ahead. Let's shoot for the stars. Let's headline it. Let's sell it out. I would love to do that.
Well, considering that this career that you've started during the pandemic, which wasn't all so long ago, 3 years, and you've come to this point. I have no doubt that you'll hit those
Two
achievements.
Wade.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, thank you so much, Giselle, for being
Yeah.
brave enough to be the first
Thank you. This
guest
was so
on Keys.
fun.
So there it is, episode 1 of Keys from Keynotes. I really hope you enjoyed this content. Giselle did such an amazing job in this interview, really being vulnerable and sharing so many good tips that hopefully some clicked with you and will help you, whether you're a brand new speaker aspiring for great things, or maybe you just have an upcoming speech and you wanted to get some tips from someone who is a pro. I think Giselle provided all of that. If this is your first time, if you're watching this on YouTube and you haven't seen one of my videos before, consider subscribing. My channel is all about helping make you a better, more impactful communicator. And if you're listening to this on the podcast, please also subscribe, because I want to continue this series. And I think that metric of how much people are resonating with this content will tell me whether this is something that is really valued by the community. So thank you so much for watching or listening to this episode, and I'll see you soon.